So fun fact about me, ever since I was a little girl, I've wanted to go to a ball. You guys know the ones I'm talking about with the big fluffy gowns and the long white gloves. I credit a lot of this to the animated film Anastasia. There's something about those ghosts coming out of the portrait dancing that really just stuck with me, like the costuming. That's cinema, baby. But at the time, my childhood brain couldn't really comprehend that those gowns would actually be couture and cost thousands of dollars, and that those dances were actually choreographed and learned over months. I thought everyone just spawned at birth with this knowledge of how to dance a quadrille. But as a teenager and now adult with a deep love for historical fiction and the beautiful films that accompany them, the more I learned about ball culture as I grew up, the more I became enamored. What once had been a childhood obsession with bouffants and pin curls turned into actually enjoying the social and political aspects that came along with these grand events. And honestly, I'm not a purist. I really love to see public opinion wax and wane over Sofia Coppola's 2006 Marie Antoinette because I've loved it since it came out. And because of this, I was also a fan of more fantastical films like The Labyrinth with its beautiful white dreamlike opening ball sequence, and even films like Crimson Peak that take a more haunting and artistic approach to ballroom and dance culture as a whole. So, as you can imagine, I was delighted when all of these ball-themed events started popping up across TikTok. And since then, I've seen everything from book-theme events to tickets to the Philharmonic Opera in Austria. So that is what today's video is about. The rise and resurgence of ball culture, a little bit of historical information if you will, and why we need balls now more than ever. So a little backstory, balls have a bit of a sketchy origin. Although we think of them now as these beautiful grand events to dress up and dance at, in all actuality, they were much more important than that. Throughout history, most balls and events like them sort of function as social and political networking, where things like marriages and alliances would often be proposed and solidified. Most sources point to the Greek historian Herodotus as kind of the beginning of what would become the ball as we know it. Although at this time, it was more so of a maiden fair, if you will. Essentially, all of the eligible women in the village would be rounded up like cattle and brought to the center market, where then these eligible bachelors, local townsmen would have you, and make claims on them by offering payments known as a dowry, which is basically a lump sum that a wealthy husband would offer to the parents of another wealthy family to prove that they were capable of keeping their daughter in the life she was accustomed to. Dowries were also seen as kind of a payment for an investment or an object, as women at the time were essentially seen as just that. Back in this day, having an heir meant having someone to carry on your house and your legacy. However, there was a difference. The dowry system that existed during Herodotus' time was kind of a trickle-down economy. Basically, the more desirable maidens would be sold off quite quickly, and then from there, the money would be pooled to pay a dowry for the less desirable girls to be married off, so that no one would go unmarried or without heirs, leaving the village to die out. The concept of maiden fairs would go on to pop up all over what would become the country of England, as well as the European continent. And as customs spread and times modernized, maiden fairs would become a big to-do. Girls and their families would often travel to major cities like Venice and Paris to participate in the markets that would include festivals, traveling vendors, often street performers. But the ball as we know it would find its footing in the Baroque era, which lasted roughly from 1600 to 1750. So at this point in the world, you have a few major players, all of which had a competing ball culture. You might have heard of this man, King Louis of France, better known as the Sun King, especially if you were someone whose special interest was Marie Antoinette or the French aristocracy as a whole. But Louis here is credited for starting a lot of ball traditions that we know of today. One of the pioneers of dance in general, Louis would often dress himself and his court in lavish dress and costume, and perform for his subordinates around him, even infamously having had dancers covered in tar and speck to give the illusion of a dancing knight, quite literally putting their lives in danger as tar is highly flammable. And at the time, the palace was lit primarily by wax candlelight. In fact, King Louis was so dedicated to his love of partying and opulence that he had his father's remote hunting lodge transformed into the Palace of Versailles, an undertaking that essentially drained the French coffers and took decades to complete. Versailles would become well known for its balls, especially those held in its infamous Hall of Mirrors, an innate and intricate stretch of room that stood between both the king and queen's quarters. It was designed by architect Jules Mansart and was said to actually be quite dark and creepy when unlit. This would also be where Marie Antoinette of Austria would marry Louis, the Dauphin of France. Cue the Sofia Coppola B-roll. Louis's first event at Versailles would actually be the Party of the Delights of the Enchanted Island in 1664. The 7-day event would be the first time that music, theater, art, and poetry would come together to entertain French aristocracy. And the party was wild. The king and his closest companions actually performed an elaborate 3-day ballet based on the tale of this magician, and there were elephants, papier-mâché whales, fireworks, and a literal castle they lit on fire. And afterwards, there was a magnificent feast served by servants in masks and costume. Although it was very Italian of them, the French court actually loved a masked ball. And that is one that you can currently attend today, because every year Versailles hosts a multitude of balls, the most popular being Le Grand Mask Ball, an all-night EDM rave thrown in the heart of the castle. Since 2011, the event has been held in June and upholds a strict Baroque dress code, as well as masks for the entire duration of the night. Tickets range from €150 to €550, with the highest tier offering guests a buffet and all-night unlimited champagne service. Meaning, once you add on airfare, costume rentals, and accommodations, a trip to one of Versailles' many balls could easily set you back thousands of dollars. Yet, every year, tickets sell out faster than the last. But what is it about playing pretend for a night that would have people shelling out loads of cash when the world's economy is the worst it's ever been? Psychologist Joseph Pine in 1990, the experience economy speaks to the idea that in times of economic hardship, people are no longer content with just goods. In fact, they want an experience. Though originally relating to businesses, think Benihana or any other restaurant that puts on a show or offers a gimmick, the experience economy has started to rise again as Gen Zs and millennials face unprecedented economic uncertainty. In fact, in a 2023 poll, 78% of millennials stated they would rather shell out money for an experience over a material good. An article titled "Millennials Think an Annual Vacation is Important to the American Dream" by Brittany Brown points to the multiple recessions, predatory housing market, and rise in inflation all coming together to create a live for today mentality amongst younger generations. And goes on to highlight that for many people in these marginalized groups, the pros of spending thousands on an event like these fantasy balls often outweigh the cons. For many, travel can reduce stress, broaden your social and cultural horizons, and often offer a much needed break from the monotony of day-to-day life. And because of the economic instability Gen Z was born into, many think this kind of save for tomorrow, earn your retirement mentality has left many boomers working until they're too sick or too old to truly enjoy the fruits of their labor. Meaning, for many young Americans, the American dream no longer consists of a white picket fenced home, mid-sized sedan, and a job in corporate America. In fact, many are willing to forego homeowning entirely and rent, delay having kids, or live frugally in order to prioritize experiences that bring them joy. And in return, the consumer economy has taken notice, meaning balls and grand events inspired by them pop up all the time now. BookTok specifically has played a huge part in bringing these events into popularity. There are many balls with quite similar names and premises that often employ actors to dress up in characters from popular romantasy books, like Sarah J. Maas's A Court of Thorn and Roses or Rebecca Yaros's Fourth Wing. There was even a dark romance-themed ball called Sinners in Stardust that recently caused quite a bit of controversy online. But truly, balls are everywhere and there is something for everyone. There is an annual Anne Rice-themed vampire ball that takes place in the South and has a more gothic, haunted aesthetic for vampire and horror literature enthusiasts alike, in Austen-inspired Regency events, and historic ones inspired by the works of George R. R. Martin and J.R. Tolkien, as well as our everyday, more common ones like military balls, proms, and homecoming, which, if you ever wondered why high schoolers end up being deemed part of a court and two are crowned king and queen, now you know. But when talking about the experience economy, balls, and paying to play pretend for a night, you absolutely have to talk about the Bridgerton experience. Based on Netflix and Shondaland's popular adaptation of Julia Quinn's best-selling novel, Bridgerton is extremely popular and has spawned all types of product lines and collaborations. So it made sense when a traveling Bridgerton experience post popped up on social media. The event allowed ticket purchasers to spend a night donned in their best Regency attire. There were dance performances, food, and even a chance to bow before the Queen herself. And at the end of the night, someone from the audience would be chosen and crowned Diamond of the Season, as happens in the show. Like France, England had its own ball and social dance culture, though constant infighting in the English monarchy would have it reserved for things like wedding celebrations and birthdays. In fact, at one point in our timeline, the monarchy was actually dissolved into a republic ruled by a set of governors, and it would be the restoration of the Stuart monarchy where ball culture would come to thrive once again. The Queen Catherine of Braganza threw her first big birthday ball in 1666 to try and show the world and her new subjects that the monarchy was strong and stable and open to engaging in political affairs. But because the monarchy had just been restored, England's ball culture differed greatly from France's. While both enjoyed the Italian tradition of masquerades, England was more marriage market meets military ball. The English court was all about respect and etiquette, how to walk, how to talk, and hold the spoon correctly. Unlike royals performing at the French court, princes, princesses, and the upper echelon of society were expected to perform intricate dances in front of the king and queen. So families traveled all across England, Ireland, and Scotland and spared no expense to make sure their daughters would look suitable and not embarrass their family name. And because of this, it wouldn't be until the Regency era that balls in England became the social to-do they had been across the rest of Europe. You see, the king at the time, George III, suffered with bouts of mental illness, most likely bipolar 2. And because of this, many thought he was unfit to sit the throne. So in hopes of staging a coup, his enemies used the press to slander his and Queen Charlotte's name, with the most common critique being that the king and queen were flat broke. Yeah, they told the world they ain't got no money. So as an attempt to quell these rumors, the king threw the first ever Queen Charlotte's birthday ball, a fundraiser for a local maternity hospital sponsored by the royals. And so families from all across the Ton, Britain's elite high society, were in attendance and didn't waste the opportunity to debut their eligible daughters before the queen and king, and in doing so, giving birth to the concept of debutante balls. Deb balls were typically the closing ceremony to mark the end of the social season, which typically spanned from May to July. And if you can believe it, they came with even more rules than the balls before them. Debutantes were allowed to pick their own dresses and accessories, but to be seen before Queen Charlotte, they must be adorned in white elbow-length gloves and have ostrich feathers in their hair. And only after a nomination from a chaperone could one attend. This kind of Deb culture would set the standard for 150 plus years to come, and would be the reason for dozens of political marriages and alliances, with many cultures going on to emulate this formula. In fact, George and Martha Washington threw the first Deb ball on American soil at the end of the Revolutionary War as an attempt to integrate American high society and find advantageous matches for the rest of the Founding Fathers' family. of paying to be royal for a night was truly born in this era. See, in Bridgerton, they show the bon ton, the elites of London's high society. But over in America, we had the 400. The 400 was basically this list of the most affluential and important families in American high society, created by a socialite, Caroline Schumacher Astor. As rapid industrialization allowed for Midwestern families to accrue insane amounts of wealth, they naturally moved to the bigger city to expand their empire, though they were pretty much instantly shunned from the established society. You've probably heard of some of these families, but the most popular of the nouveau riche would be the Vanderbilts. Known as arrivists to the old money of New York, families like the Vanderbilts set their eyes on integrating into society. And in doing so, they threw many a ball. In fact, American ball culture thrived during this time. One of the most infamous being Alva Vanderbilt's 1883 costume ball, which boasted an insane 12,000 person guest list and lasted from sundown to sunrise. The party allegedly cost about $250 American, which is roughly 6 million adjusted with today's inflation. Arrivists were more interested in the French way of living, the opulence, showing off their wealth, and solidifying their spot in upper society, where the 400 took a more English approach to life. As much of their socializing was inundated with etiquette, tradition, as well as a direct quote from Mrs. Astor herself, keeping the bloodlines pure. But in the way we literally buy tickets to dress up as fae for a night, the American arrivists weren't satisfied with simply buying their way into society. And so, this era would birth the American dollar princesses, a nickname given to the daughter of wealthy Americans who married into English high society. You see, at this time, England was pretty hard on its luck, and most aristocratic families had either run out of wealth or what little they did have went into running their costly estate homes and affairs. And so, wealthy, social climbing Americans and broke down on their luck aristocrats sort of made a deal. They would marry the daughters of wealthy American men in exchange for dowry and financial support. And in return, the daughters would become titled and gain prestige. Most importantly, they would bear heirs who would inherit the family estate. Which is just so funny because those who had been shunned from New York society for their desire to social climb were now directly rewarded in England with the castles and bloodlines the 400 so desperately wished to emulate. By record states, there were actually a crazy number of marriages during this time period, with some sources quoting 450 marriages between Gilded Age American women and English aristocrats. Which, fun fact, Winston Churchill was actually the son of an American dollar princess. So who can hardly blame someone for shelling out $400 to dance for one night at a convention center in Boston when it's practically our American historical right to do so? All of this being said, it makes sense to me that with the current economic uncertainty and stress of the average American's day-to-day life, that they would save money or even all-out splurge on these events that make them feel seen, happy, and heard. Because whether you're a maiden looking for a marriage, a debutante wanting to make her parents proud, or a local prom queen, on some level, all humans desire a simple sense of belonging and kinship. And so, for a short period of time, attendees get to play pretend and look beautiful while doing it, with the potential to make lifelong friends or even love matches. And while historically these balls weren't the most fun or inclusive, modern day events don't come with the pressure of a literal war breaking out depending on who you dance with, or still having to live as a political pawn the moment the event ends. And on a deeper note, for most of us, you can't put a price tag on things like validating that inner child whose dream it was to dance the night away as someone else. And as material goods continue to depreciate in value and quality, the time you spend making these types of memories seems like a priceless investment. As the saying goes, in the end, I guess we're all just addicted to something that takes the pain away. Even if that is a 6'4" character actor and body paint with a string quartet version of Seven Rings by Ariana Grande playing softly in the background. Honestly, R.I.P. Louis the Sun King. You would have loved Sinners and Stardust.